Well, there we have it. The all-new Alpine A521 has been launched. It is a new name for the team, formerly known as Renault. And Lawrence, from what we've seen, let's just say the livery looks great, because I'm not convinced we've yet seen the actual car.
No, so we, of course, Will and I were talking about this before we started recording, and Will was at pains to remind me that they are just renders. So we've got to be careful to what we say about them. But for us, I think it's just great that they did a proper launch. Will and I were in Paris last year, and they just revealed a few close-up images. So it was nice to see like a full car. At least it was what we assume will be close to the 2021 car. That hits the track tomorrow, actually, in a shakedown at Silverstone. And yeah, it was great. I thought the livery was great. It really popped.
It really did. Of course, only one driver in attendance, but there's only one driver carrying over from 2020 into 2021. So let's have a look at how they finished last season. Lawrence, 2020 was another one of those years of rebuilding for what was the Renault F1 team.
I've lost count of how many years Renault or the Enstone-based team have been rebuilding. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just that obviously they've been trying year on year to build that operation up, but they probably haven't made the steps, at least in the last couple of years, that they had hoped to aspire to. I know at the start of this whole project, by now they wanted to be winning races, competing for the World Championship. And I know that, things don't always go your way, but I think they're disappointed that it hasn't quite worked out for them. So I was then interested to hear Luca Di Maio go, well, we want to be winning races at this year's launch. And I was like, well, okay, well, that's, punchy. I like it. But given the history, and, we've covered them over the last few years, it's been difficult. And to do that in a competitive midfield is going to be tricky.
Yeah, 2020 was a really interesting season, I feel, for the team formerly known as Renault. They really came on song towards that Silverstone weekend, that doubleheader around the 70th anniversary, and were competitive right the way to the end of the season, but never quite looked like posing as consistent a threat to the likes of the Racing Points or the McLarens as we might have expected. Was it a season of disappointments for them, given that they lost Daniel Ricciardo as well, that they'd put so much emphasis on him being the future of the team, of believing in the project, and then he disappeared off to a team which was one of their closest rivals?
I think it was a huge disappointment that Daniel decided to leave, especially as he obviously brought them a couple of podiums last year. I think he really got comfortable at the team around that point in which you said, Will, that they kind of found their feet last year. So that would have hurt them. And I think that's maybe part of the reason why Cyril, of course, left at the end over the winter. And they've changed things up on the management side. I think you can take positives from last year in that they understood the car a bit better. They had a bit of a better platform towards the end of the year. Even Esteban Ocon scored a podium as well. Yeah. So I think that's great across the board. So I think there were positives to take. But then when you look at the Constructors' Championship at the end of the year, they'd got beaten by their main rivals, worse, their customer, McLaren, and of course, Racing Point. That's just a disappointment, whatever way you look at it.
You've already touched on the fact that Cyril Abiteboul will not be there this season, so let's look at what changes into 2021. The headline then, of course, Lawrence, is Daniel Ricciardo out, Fernando Alonso in, and then Cyril Abiteboul not just gone from the newly branded Alpine team, gone from Group Renault altogether. Davide Brivio, so successful in MotoGP and Superbikes, into the team as sporting director. It is quite an incredible lineup, but is this the right time for them to be making such wholesale changes when stability surely is what the team was aiming for?
I guess they just felt that now was the time to make those changes because they'd gone maybe as far as they could go with Cyril. You mentioned that he's left the brand entirely. 2 decades, he spent at Renault. And so for them to do that, I guess they are looking at this as a clean sheet of paper. Since Luca Di Maio came in, he's made changes like from the ground up. So I guess we shouldn't be too surprised that he's gone bold and he's gone left field, with David Brivio coming in from MotoGP. It's got to work though. I think there's risks here. Like you said, they're making changes, but those changes could be for the better. And I guess if you want to make gains in a competitive midfield, but also move yourself up into being considered a top team, I think you've got to make these kind of changes, especially if you want to make if you want to make change quick.
Fernando Alonso, we have to talk about his return to
Mhm.
Formula One. He wasn't at the launch, of course, today. He is recovering from an accident that he had, a road accident that he had. And we wish him well, obviously, with his recovery. But his signing by Renault seemed to me, certainly at the time, slightly that it smacked of desperation. They just lost the guy that they'd put all of their hope in Daniel Ricciardo. What could Cyril possibly do to make up for that disappointment? Sign the last guy that won them a world championship. Is it desperation? Is it a marriage of convenience? Can they ever possibly, go back a decade and a half to when Fernando was last competitive with that team?
I think that it just worked. Like you said, the marriage of convenience is a good way of describing it. I think that they lost that big name in Daniel, and there wasn't a lot of options out there because this team is in transition. It's not like it was easy for them to try and get a Sebastian Vettel, who was available to buy into the project. So I think going for Fernando works on a few levels. It bought them time because bringing, the savior back, it's a nice story to tell. He could be brilliant on his way back, but obviously the downside is he could have lost some of his speed. He could have been scrubbed off. So again, it falls into this bracket of, it's a risk what Alpine are doing this year. But I'm excited to see what Fernando does, and I'm excited to see whether this risk has paid off.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's look then at today's launch. Let's look at what we learned. Well, let's start with the launch itself, Lawrence. I've got to say, I enjoyed the concept. I enjoyed the fact that it was innovative and modern, with the sort of social distance nature of a virtual launch and holograms. I thought it was great.
I'm with you. It was a great launch, a great idea, innovative. When we look at this season, and we've got a lot of carryover from last year to this year, that the teams are trying these different things in these weird COVID times is great. I thought it looked really cool. It was a good way of getting everyone there. It was a shame that, given they used this format where they kind of beamed people in, they couldn't use Fernando in that way. So that was a slight disappointment, that he didn't really play that much of a role. He waved, I think. That was about, I think, from memory, the only thing that we saw from him. So that was disappointing. But if this is a signal of what they're trying to do, and even if it didn't come across in the smoothest way, I think that's a good sign for Alpine. They've gone big on the livery, they've gone big on their approach to the launch, they've gone big on their management and one of their drivers. I'm excited to see what this is going to be a big story. Well, we're going to be talking about this on our shows all through the year, I think.
Yeah, one way or another we will. I love the livery, that beautiful metallic, proper Alpine blue. It's a stunning livery. It will really stand out. We don't know. We can't talk about the car at the moment because, we were talking about, the side pods maybe look a little bit different and have they done this there? Yeah, you know what? They can design whatever they want with a render, but when we see it on track tomorrow, or will we, if they pull a Red Bull and send out 76 photos of everything other than the car, then who knows if we'll see it until we get to Bahrain. One thing we did learn, though, that Fernando will be testing in Bahrain, but even if he's not, they've got a new reserve driver.
Oh, yeah, Danny Kvyat, still in Formula One. You know what? Reserve driver stories don't generally get many people excited, but I think this is a massive story that that Danny's sticking around. I think he's underrated. I think it's great that he's going to be in and around the project. He can really help those guys out. And we saw last year on multiple occasions, reserve drivers are needed. So
yeah. And tell me, do we know, does he stay part of the Red Bull program, or is he now out of Red Bull completely, moving to Alpine?
So that is unclear. It looks like it's more he's out of the program and will focus on this. And then if they want to recall him, I guess it's up to him what he does there. That was his third chance, wasn't it, last time around with Red Bull? So it will be. I think he kind of towards the back end of last year, he was looking for a bit of a clean break, I think. So I think this, in terms of breathing fresh air into his career and just his mindset, is huge.
Absolutely brilliant. Guan Yu Zhou as well, of course, continuing with the team as their young driver and second reserve. Great news all round. Right, let's look then at the season to come and their hopes, aspirations, and what their strengths might be. So out of all the teams that we've spoken about so far, Lawrence, this is one that really, I think, is quite an interesting consideration for their strengths and their weaknesses, because it's not so clear cut as all the others.
No, completely. Because I think a lot of the strengths we could start talking about in this section could also turn out to be weaknesses.
Oh, yeah.
I think that their strengths for me is that they've built up this operation at Enstone. They've done a lot of redevelopment there. And I think now is the time when either A, it's going to start happening, or B, we need to demand that it starts, coming through. The improvements that they've made there. I think they've got good people in place on the management side of things. So I think that's a strength. I think Fernando coming back is a strength in terms of motivation for the staff. I think bringing back a two-time world champion shows intent. So I think that from those point of view, I think there's a lot to be proud of and a lot to be positive about.
I'm really looking forward to seeing what Brivio brings to the party. He is so highly regarded. I can't wait to. I've never met him, so I'm really looking forward to kind of like getting to know him and how he operates and seeing what he does, how he molds that team. Because looking at what he did at Yamaha, what he did at Suzuki and MotoGP, it's going to be great to see what he can do with this team. I'm really excited about Martin Bukowski getting a little bit more responsibility and leading the team as well. Great guy. So looking forward to that. As you said, though, these strengths could turn out to be weaknesses. It's Brivio's first season in Formula One.
Yeah.
Will the transition work for him? And Fernando, for all of the motivation he brings, we know that in the past he has also been a divisive figure in some of the teams at which he's raced. If he allows that to creep back in, it could be disastrous.
It could be. And I guess when they decided to sign him, they knew that was the biggest risk of all, really, that things don't go well either for the team or Fernando just finds it difficult to readjust to life in Formula One. And, we've seen in the past, particularly with McLaren, when things don't go right, he is quite vocal about it. And that's going to have the complete opposite effect in terms of motivation. So it's really important, I think, for the team to maintain that bond and that relationship with Fernando and try and stop that from happening, because it could have a colossal effect on the team and not in a good way.
No, absolutely. So after the disappointment of recent years, let's look at what would be a good year or a bad year for the team. So this is an interesting one. Where do we think their sights are set? What do we think their hopes and aspirations are for the season, and therefore what a good or bad year would look like?
I think because it's their first year as Alpine, I think they can almost afford to maybe have a mediocre year this year, just because they can just play on the fact that, it's first year, lots of changes, as we've talked about. And I think that should then take the pressure off and hopefully help them in that battle in the midfield. I think that for them, podiums and regular podiums need to be the minimum. Really, they showed last year 3 times, wasn't it, that they took podiums, and other midfield outfits showed that they could. So with so much carryover, I know there's lots of changes to the floor and there's still a lot of changes to the car. I think with that kind of carryover, it would be disappointing if they go back and they rode back from that. That'll be probably their worst case scenario, that, they don't score podiums, say, or it's less than what they achieved last year. But also that they don't want to be falling back into the clutches of AlphaTauri, who look very strong this year. They're going to have a resurgent Ferrari probably if the power unit delivers on that end. So, very quickly it can turn into they're ended up 7th, and that would be bad. So I suppose from them, they just need to make sure they hit the ground running in that midfield battle from the off, just like McLaren did last year.
Of course, they're the only team using the Renault power unit built over at Mecca Chrome, which, as we know, over testing, they're only going to have their 3 days. Whatever changes they've made to that power unit, it's only themselves testing it. They don't have other teams to run through and find potential issues with it, should they have made any or hope to have made any substantial gains with it. Is that a benefit, or is that something that might hold them back, being their sole exclusive use of that power unit?
I think if we base it on history, I think it's a bad thing, actually. We saw with Honda how much they struggled when they just had one team. Obviously different manufacturers, they deal with things differently. But I think Renault are going to be hurt by not generally having a customer at all across the boards. They've said that they want to in future gain that. But I think, like you said, Will, that's going to be difficult. They've just got less data to analyse through the year.
So if they are looking towards 2022, is Fernando going to be happy with that? I mean, Fernando's objectives for the season might be way higher than the team's.
I don't know what's going through Fernando's mind at the moment. Only other than when he signed, he must have realised that this year was going to be something of a transition, even before the whole Alpine thing. Obviously, he did that before that news broke. I think he's got to understand that this year is a more of a, I know he used this word transition, but it's just a year setting up for next year. I think if you get to the end of next year and they haven't made those gains that they're expecting, okay, maybe then he's got a point to be upset and frustrated. But I think he's got to really kind of keep his powder dry this year, and really for himself, actually, just get back into the shape that we know or we saw Fernando Alonso could deliver in Formula One, and even in the latter years at McLaren.
So what are we looking at? Best case scenario, third or fourth? Worst case scenario, seventh?
Yeah, so best case scenario, I think even with a resurgent Ferrari, should be third. I think they should be punching for that. I think worst case scenario is seventh, or even worse, getting pulled into that Alfa Romeo Haas Williams battle, because if they do that, they've dropped a chunk, really. Even if they finish bottom of the McLaren Aston Martin group, but just pretty close, I don't think you should be disappointed by that. But it's got to be competitive. They've got to show themselves well.
And here's the thing, with the potentially resurgent Williams, with investments, with the increases that Ferrari are hoping they've made to their power unit, there is absolutely no guarantee that Alpine won't be dragged into that fight at the bottom as well. A fascinating season ahead for them, mate. Really, I think one of the teams we'll be talking about, as you said, the most throughout the year, Definitely. Be it for good or ill. It's going to be a really, really interesting year. Thank you, mate, for your input, as always. Should we do this all again tomorrow?
Yes, let's. Oh, yeah, it's a good one, isn't it? Aston Martin tomorrow.
Aston Martin, another biggie. Can't wait. Thank you, mate, for that. We'll see you folks tomorrow when Aston Martin launch their car.